a lot of people, a lot of scholars, film scholars talk about the Lubitsch touch.
Right.
Can you explain what it is, or is it an invention by his agent, like some people say?
Sort of a press thing, like Hitchcock being the master of suspense, and it's a cliche, but I think in Lubitsch's case it actually has a nice poetic ring to it, because the word touch implies a delicacy of treatment, which his films are very delicate and very subtle, and touch is also sensual. There's something sensual about Lubitsch's films, the body language and the costumes and the sexiness of his films. So I think it's a good phrase, but what it really refers to is his elliptical way of storytelling, that he hated filming obvious scenes. So instead of filming a dinner party, he would film the servants commenting on the plates as they came out of the dining room, you know. There's a famous scene in Angel where there's a woman dining with her husband and a man who loves her, and so the servants are commenting that the husband ate everything on his plate and the wife didn't eat anything, and the other man chopped his meat into little tiny pieces very nervously. So it's a way of showing the essence of a scene without showing the actual scene that's going on. It's more the reactions and the ramifications of something. Or in Smiling Lieutenant, there's a famous scene where a couple spends the night together, but he doesn't show them in bed because partly because you couldn't do that back then, but also it would be too crude and unsubtle to do that. So he shows them having breakfast and having kind of sensual pleasure with the food and sort of singing to each other about the food, and it's delightful, you know. It's a way of showing the sexual bond between them without showing them just doing it, you know. Okay. That's part of Lubitsch, yeah.
You also said to me that you also saw some German Lubitsch films from the silent era in Munich. Yeah. What's the main difference between the American Lubitsch and the German Lubitsch?
Well, it's complicated because in Germany he did different kinds of films. He started as an actor and then he started directing himself. He played a kind of a comical Jewish character. There was a lot of ethnic humor in his early films, and some people think it's stereotypical, but it was a more innocent time where he was having fun with ethnic humor. And he played a kind of a go-getter, kind of a schlemiel guy who was working in stores and screwing things up, but then he would always win out at the end and marry the daughter of the boss and things like that. And then he started doing romantic comedies and domestic comedies, and then he made films set in places like Arabia and Egypt. He made exotic melodramas, and then he made historical sagas that were big spectacles. And this is what made him famous worldwide. He made Madame du Barry set in France, and he made Anna Boleyn set in England, and The Wife of the Pharaoh set in Egypt. These are very big spectacles, but what made them different from the American films was that they were sexier, and he dealt with the sex lives of the monarchs, and that appealed to people because America was still, D.W. Griffith's epics were kind of Victorian in their attitudes, and so Lubitsch seemed very modern. So those films did well in America, and they imported Lubitsch to America. But he also made some crazy comedies in Germany. But when he came to America, his films became more subtle. They were more intimate. They were about the little gestures between people and the looks that passed between people and the romantic interchanges among love triangles and various couplings and uncouplings. And so he became famous in America for his very contemporary romantic comedies. He kind of created the romantic comedy genre. Some of them were set in other countries. He made a lot of his films set in Europe because, I think partly because you could get away with more sexual content if it were European characters. People could say, oh, those Europeans are, you know, they do naughty things, but people enjoyed it. He was very popular. But then he made other kinds of films in America. He made occasional dramas, and then he eventually made some films that had some political content. Ninotchka, which is about a Russian commissar learning about capitalism, and then he made To Be or Not to Be, which is a great black comedy about Nazism. So he was quite a diverse filmmaker, but he's best known for his romantic comedies, I would say.
And And his influence in American history, who would be his natural heir nowadays?
Well, David Niven, who acted for him, called him the master's master, and all the other directors loved Lubitsch. Howard Hawks loved him, Orson Welles, Preston Sturges, Billy Wilder. You know, they all thought he was the greatest. Jean Renoir loved his work. Billy Wilder is his most famous protege. He was a writer for Lubitsch, and he was a German who fled Hitler, and he said Lubitsch was one of the talented ones who was brought over instead of having to flee. But Wilder got his start partly with Lubitsch. He helped write Ninotchka, for example. And so he tried to imitate Lubitsch a lot in his films. His films were darker and in some ways more cynical, but he would try some romantic comedies occasionally, like Sabrina, Love in the Afternoon, Avanti, all very Lubitchian films. And he had a big sign on the wall of his office that said, "How would Lubitsch do it?" And today, Wilder said Lubitsch could do more with a closed door than directors today could do with an open fly. So because we can do anything, we can show nudity and have dirty words, and subtle sex comedy is not very common in American films. It's pretty crude. So there aren't a lot of people practicing that, but occasionally somebody makes a film that tries to be more subtle. There's nobody who's doing it in a great way. Some people have made some imitation Lubitsch films. Peter Bogdanovich made At Long Last Love, which is a musical that I love, that was very Lubitchian, but people just hated it because it didn't seem, they weren't ready for a Lubitsch kind of film in the 70s. And Truffaut made The Man Who Loved Women, which is very Lubitchian. And if you look at Inglourious Bastards by Tarantino, that has a big debt to Be or Not to Be, because it deals with the Nazis in a movie theater. And To Be or Not to Be is about a theater and Nazis in a legitimate theater, and the interchange between reality and play acting and everything. So Tarantino is imitating Lubitsch, oddly enough. So you find his influence in odd places. Hitchcock was very influenced by Lubitsch. He dealt a lot with romantic situations that were kind of between the lines, and people would say things that would mean one thing to one character and something else to somebody else, and that's very Lubitchian.